Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And welcome to another edition of Monday Mini. I know when we have topics like this, we may be a little long, so we're going to try to keep it short because we have talked a lot about feminism today and how it's changing and what's changing about it and what we need to be looking at. But in March of 2022, this year, not too long ago, Ipsos, which is an international market research and consulting firm founded in 1975, just in case you need to know, as well as the fact that it's the third largest research agency at this time, conducted a global research in collaboration with the Global Institute of Women's Leadership at King's College London. And we thought we would take some time to look at those numbers and statistics and talk about it because it's kind of interesting to me. What you should know that, yes, they did do a bit of the polling in the US, but a lot of other countries as well. And from what I read in another article in reference to this specific statistics, it said that the highest amount of people who felt this strongly were Russians. So take that for what it is. We've always talked about when it comes to numbers and research, there's could be a little bias. We need to understand the underlying bits of it. So, like I said, just beware.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're focusing on is specifically the take that many, specifically men, take on feminism and what is happening with feminism today. So we know that feminism has changed a lot. There's many waves, and we are now to the point of being the intersectional feminist, which is the different layers, and that there are different leaders and different ways of looking at feminism. And hopefully we're combining different marginalized communities in this conversation so that we are better understanding what is needed for those who are oftentimes the most marginalized. So that's what we have talked about when it comes to feminism. I think some of the point of view has changed. Some of the conversation has changed since we are now in post-overturning Roe v. Wade. And it's a whole different conversation for us in general.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll never stop talking about it until it changes, just so y'all know. So if you're tired of that, go ahead and move on. Because we're never going to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So here are some interesting statistics, Anney, and I know you and I will talk a little bit of back and forth, but according to their beginning of the research, it says only 2 in 10 adults deny the existence of gender inequality. So that's good. I guess 1/5 of the people. But views are split on the benefits of feminism. So, okay, we're talking, yes, there's inequality, but at the same time, is there a benefit to feminism to solve inequality? Right? Concerns about, and I think this is really key in conversation because we've talked about it a lot, just you and I, but then we've also talked about it with Bridget when she talks about the women on the internet or those who identify as female on the internet, as well as just marginalized communities and whether or not they're safe on the internet. And they put this as part of their research in just about feminism, and I think it's important because it has such an impact on a community and an area. But they said concerns about online abuse remain, with nearly 1 in 10 men saying it's acceptable to send someone unrequested explicit images. And don't quote me on this, but I remember reading recently in an article that they're backtracking on the solicitation of the dick pics being sent as being criminal. So that's a little concerning. As we know that it's not very prosecuted often anyway, but they're talking about it's not a big deal, get over it type of conversation. And this is in like the criminal law area, so it's kind of like, okay, that's not cool. It does say 4 in 10 adults have experienced online abuse or seen sexist content, but 1 in 3 believe women are overreacting.
Wow. Okay.
So those numbers don't they believe that that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
they don't think it's
women,
a big deal.
Yeah,
right.
Are overreacting to it. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It says, quote, from their site, men are more likely to question the existence of gender inequality and the benefits of feminism. So that's not surprising.
Mm-hmm.
We've kind of known this. to the point that we celebrate men who say, yes, feminism is good, to they're heroes, like they've done something,
right.
which is really sad in itself. And they go on to say a majority of adults, both globally and in the United States, disagree gender inequality doesn't really exist. So, okay, it does. Okay, cool. However, despite the evidence that gender inequality globally has only increased since the start of the pandemic, just under 1/5 agree that both globally and in the U.S. So we've talked about this. We've repeatedly had episodes where we have seen the stark evidence that the inequality is getting worse due to the pandemic, due to the opportunities when people are being home, are at home or being quarantined, essentially. And we've seen what happens when they're, who they will choose when it comes to employment, when it comes to benefits, when it comes to promotions in dire situations like the pandemic. And if you need a refresher, we have a Monday Mini on it from a couple of years ago, I believe.
Yeah.
Because it was significant and it was noted within a year how bad it was.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, but that fact that 1/5 believe that it's not a big deal, it's kind of like, oh, and it really hasn't happened that badly. It's kind of like, wow. Okay, we have one research paper after another. Like the Pew Research came out, and then the New York Times came out with their own. It was so many, and it seems people still don't want to believe that. And it's not surprising that men are more likely to be, quote, skeptical of the benefits of feminism. On average, globally, 1/3 of men agree feminism does more harm than good, and that traditional masculinity is under threat.
Wow. Okay. I mean, you and I have talked about this recently where I still feel that I have to couch what the show is about when I'm talking to men in a way I don't feel like I have to with women.
Right.
With women, I'll be like, it's about, feminist issues. With men, I'm like, oh, it's about social issues in women, or I'll find like a way to...
Right.
And this is mostly people that I don't really care to have an argument with.
Right.
So it's just not worth it to me. But it's still a thing that I do. And I know you were saying you've done it recently too.
As in fact. So when I was looking at houses, we had a realtor, really interesting dude, who asked what I did because we were talking about the fact that we need a space to make a studio. And that I was a podcaster. Immediately, he's like, oh, what kind of podcast? And I tell him, and his response was, oh. And looked at my partner, who is a man, and was like, ooh, did the face to him to the point that I was like, oh, wow. I said it out loud. I was like, oh, okay. And walked away. That was his reaction. And then, I had gutter guys, people coming to do gutter stuff. And we were getting a whole sales pitch. And they asked me what I did. And then I was like, please don't ask what it is. Because our entire conversation pretty much laid out that they were middle-aged men, obviously, very traditional, talking about the wife cleaning and all these things. And I was like, please don't ask. Please don't ask. Don't ask what it's about, because it's going to be an argument. But I did have some really great responses. My movers, who are all men, came through, asked me what I did, told them, and they got more description. It was like, oh my God, yes, I've been wanting to know more about it because this abortion stuff is crazy. And I was talking to a woman about not being able to be protected, and I want to know more. And I was like, well, hello, look at you. So maybe that was the 1/3. Like, that's the one.
Yeah.
Out of the 8 men that I had that interaction in. So my statistics are not very good either.
No.
But it was a pleasant surprise, I will say.
Yes.
And again, it was one of those moments of like, I want to pat you on the back and congratulate you, but all you're doing is really just listening and learning.
Right.
And I'm trying to give you like awards for that. Low standards, but I'm still proud. And please keep, for the men who've been listening, because we have several men who do listen, thank you so much. Don't think we're trying to negate what you're doing, but understand this should be the norm.
Right. And I do feel like a lot of times there's the 2 reactions I get from men who I can tell are in this like 1/3. I usually get either what you did with the realtor of like, oh, you must be a real pain.
Yeah.
Oh, you must be so annoying. or I get kind of the strange, backhanded, like what did this guy said to me recently, like, I feel like we should forget feminism and live in a world where we don't need feminism because that's drawing more attention to the fact of this and trying to like make it sound like I'm the one who is somehow misled or something.
Which is an actual tactic for a lot of supremacists, because we see this in racial issues as well. They're like, you're causing this to be an issue, which is what's happening with any conversation about CRT, any conversation in talking about historical accuracy when it comes to the enslaved peoples, and why we need to talk about it, and why there still needs to be reparations and a conversation and an understanding that being equal and equitable is two different things. But yeah, that's exactly what it is. He's like, oh, but if you didn't talk about it, draw so much attention to it, it wouldn't be so bad, which is that whole level of like, okay, feminism means losing masculinity. And that's kind of this battle that we've seen and constant, and we're going to talk about it. We keep teasing it, and it's such a big episode, but within religion as well, because it is based on this masculine patriarch that has to protect. So if feminism come in saying that people are independent or should be treated equal, then you are diverting attention and or possibly resources, heaven forbid, from the supreme archetype of what was set up. So this whole conversation is really interesting that we're back here again. And don't get me wrong, I didn't look at the past numbers because I'm sure they pulled out the negative for us to be aware. And again, this is polling more men than they do women about this, and trying to understand, is it making headway as equality, or is it making are we still in the muck trying to find a footing to have a conversation, just a mere conversation of what is unbalanced here. And I found that interesting. There's a lot more it says. It talks a lot more about the online abuse. It talks a lot more about victim blaming. So it goes even deeper into that level. And we know that the Me Too era has brought in a whole new level of research in this conversation about feminism and why feminism is important. And because of this, there was an article, interesting enough, that I want to revisit, talking about what it looks like today, post the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and what feminism looks like in this abortion landscape, or banning of abortion landscape. Because we are having to retract and come back to basic rights as opposed to finding finally a level playing field. There's also been some conversation about the political movement a lot, because, Biden just came out hitting hard for the first time ever since his, I guess, campaigning against extreme right-wing politics, as well as we're talking about CRT. Obviously, we're talking about abortion. There's so many really extremist ideas that's coming up, the all or none type of conversation. And I found it interesting because people are starting to flip a little bit. And I say people, here's what I mean. And I told you, I was like, I'm so interested in this. I hate the news. I despise it. I don't want to read it. There's a big conversation about how some of the big popular, even left-wing media is turning towards the right wing because it gets more play. Yeah. Which is a whole different conversation in itself. But I was watching it, and they actually had on people who are pretty conservative people talking about the upcoming elections, and that one of the big key issues that they want addressed is abortion, which is not surprising for the leftists in that level of like, where do you stand? But that the conservatives think that this ban is too harsh, and that it is too overwhelming, and that if the candidate that they were previously supporting or that is in their party are too hard into the ban, they probably will not vote for them. And I saw like this interview, and they interviewed a pretty big group of people in Michigan, which is a pretty big battleground right now. And so many of the people I interviewed were like, that's the number one thing. And to the point, they're like, I've never thought about this issue as much as I have now. And now knowing what we're trying to do, I think it's too much, and I will not vote for this person. I even saw one of the candidates who were, I'll just say, very Trump extremist, playing into that type of rhetoric, would not answer any questions about abortion because they felt it was too divisive for them to speak on and that they would lose votes, which is extremely different to what was happening. Or maybe I'm just haven't paid as much attention, because we know statistically that people support abortion as well as the right to abortion and reproductive care. Like actually like over 60%, if not 70%, even in the state of Georgia, support it. So I just had not actually heard it coming out of conservative people's mouths until recently. And I find that interesting, and I wonder how that's going to play out.
Yeah, when you said that, I was also very intrigued, because we had that episode with Bridget after Roe v. Wade where she talked about, there's been so much misinformation and disinformation, not only about what abortion is, but about who supports it and how many people support it. And I said, like, I grew up thinking I was the outlier for supporting abortion, and that's not the case at all. But that's how effective they've been in turning this into such a big flashpoint. But it's a flashpoint for like a small set of very passionate people who are against abortion. And now that we've reached this point, like, I feel like a lot of conservative people, as you said, like, maybe it wasn't their number one issue, didn't really think about it, heard talking points and was like, okay, I'm not super for abortion, but it's not my issue. And now that it's become this thing with Roe v. Wade being overturned, they're having to think about it and confront it in a way that before they were happy to just kind of like push it off to the side. Like, oh, that's not my issue. That's fine. But with all of this, so it is interesting to hear people that I would have previously never imagined saying something like that.
Right. That's a lot of conversations that we have to have, what this looks like, politically, what this looks like. Unfortunately, I hate that we just have this binary system thus far, but we do have to have the conversation, which we actually could have this conversation about the system of voting about Alaska's recent election, which is pretty fascinating in itself. And the fact that they have their first Indigenous person in their office, which is phenomenal. I'm not really sure her stances. I believe she's pretty moderate from what I understand. We also have this whole conversation of what it looks like. Is our time frame in feminism and our activism going to look similar to pre-Roe v. Wade? Is that where we are? In this conversation, the writer Lauren Jackson specifically talks about some of the questions that are out there and what we need to do and what we can do. And then just also talking about how time has changed since then, and our tactics have to change. And there's a lot of divide and splits. I mean, when we have feminism, TERFs have always been around, but they're not more adamant, I feel like, and more vocal as of late. And it's become there's so many splintering of what feminism is, which is not surprising. People have different perspectives. It was on a spectrum on this level, but to deny one group of people based on your prejudice is denying all of...
Yep. Kind of antithetical to the,
So I found that interesting. Again, how do we fight it? Do we do it politically? Do we do it how? I just watched a TikTok of an OBGYN and an abortion provider who talked about a case that's happening in Alabama. I did not know this. I believe it's Alabama. I'm so sorry if it's wrong. Where they are now jailing women who are pregnant with possible drug issues to help them, quote unquote, save the baby, but not providing them care. So this is the extremes that we were always scared of. We were going to come back and kind of revisit some of the results. I don't want to because it's so awful, but it's the truth. I just saw a testimony from a South Carolina representative begging them to remember, and she was a Republican, that you are not medical professionals and you should not have a say. And it was pretty surprising because South Carolina, Lindsey Graham's hometown, is a whole different conversation. But I've seen several people coming back like, we did not realize the damage this was going to cause when we thought we wanted it.
Yeah, and this is sort of almost like the men who are like, oh, I'm feminist, and we pat them on the back. It's sort of like
right.
Conservatives who you've been fine with all of this until it might actually impact you. But also, I think it's a really negative outcome of our politics now in the modern time, where people just say stuff to rile people up. And then when that thing that they said actually goes into law or whatever, then they're like, oh, it's not
we didn't
good.
have a plan. We didn't know what this would cause. And here we are.
Right.
Like, all we knew was one moral stance, and
exactly.
we wanted it no matter what.
Yeah. Where it's just about, like, I need to get people to vote for me. Then you do the thing. It just feels so craven. It's just about getting elected again and nothing about actually serving people.
Right. And and again, I know we came back down to talking about abortion, but it is this conversation of what we see and understand. This links to why we say feminism and equality is needed. And yes, things have changed, and we've gotten a few scraps from the table. And I say we as in the marginalized community. And people really think that should be enough, and not remembering, this is not equity. This is not what should be happening, and this is what has been being fought for. Just because, kind of like how we're saying we're giving accolades and accommodations to those who are doing the minimal because they're a little outside of the norm, we shouldn't be. And the fact of the matter that we still have 1 in 3 men saying that feminism is not helping, that's a conversation in itself. With the fact that 1 in 3 men think, 1 in 3 people think that women are overreacting or being harassed and like bullied and sexually assaulted or harassed on online. That's a problem.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's still kind of shocking to me how many people, when I'll just kind of in passing be like, how many men specifically, let's cross the street over this way, because if we walk this way, I'm going to get catcalled. Like, they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, this is just my everyday life. And you don't have to think about it. And so always about, bringing people in. But I think we need to be clear about the standards we're upholding people to, who's getting the accolades and attention and who should. But also, and we've talked about this time and time again, and we should come back and revisit it. I think the word feminism has just it had such a smear campaign against it.
Yeah.
And it is still viewed as like, which is funny now, because now I'm like, let's just embrace it. But it's like angry women who want to ruin everything that you love.
I do. I want to ruin everything.
You should put that on a business card.
I will do.
I love it. Yeah, there's a lot we should come back and revisit with this one.
For sure.
For sure. For sure. And a lot more work to be done. But listeners, as always, if there's something you want us to talk about in these segments, any suggestions, we would love to hear from you. Our email is stephanie@momstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter @momstuffpodcast or on Instagram @stuffI'venevertoldYou. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina.
Who is the best? Yes.
The absolute best. And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.